Hello and welcome to Musée de Venoge. Thank you for joining us Fireside on this crisp autumn evening. Can you imagine where we would be if it weren't for thinkers and explorers? The Earth might still be considered flat, and the Swiss may never have risked traveling to a new land to settle here. Tonight's topic was delivered with much debate and consideration. Things that create much debate must be worthy of debate. What would life be without those thinkers and explorers? Accidental and, frankly, boring. Feel free to join in the discussion by sending your comments and questions as we embark on a very interesting topic. It's so good to be Fireside again. Hello, Mrs. Weaver.
Hello, Mrs. Lapenna. Yes, it is. It's by the fireside and it's warm. And we're so thrilled that everybody's joined us again this evening for the return of the Venoge Fireside stream. But did you know that at one time people thought the earth was hollow? We're going to go on a journey this evening to find out perhaps the answer, at least the question. But first, let's meet our speaker this evening, Dave Bennett. Our guest tonight is Dave Bennett. Currently a resident of Western Missouri, Dave is a native Texan who began his living history journey over 30 years ago at Fort Osage Historic Site in Sibley, Missouri. Over those 3 decades, he has portrayed soldiers from the War of 1812 to the Civil War. His interest and passion led him to found Clemson's company with the 1st U.S. Infantry and the Missouri Rangers. No stranger to commanding large numbers of troops, Dave was in charge of the right wing of the American Army at the bicentennial of the Battle of New Orleans in 2015. An accomplished author, he has a full-length book in progress. Showcasing his research talents, Dave hosts the War of 1812 in the West Symposium every year. His many talents have led him to curate numerous exhibits relating to the War of 1812 time period. He has also served as military advisor in major films and videos. Dave is married to Sally Colford Bennett, a well-known author and 1812 historian herself. Portraying Captain John Cleves Symmes on our YouTube channel, Tales from the Tavern series, Dave's character is entrenched in an interesting theory about our Earth.
And that hole goes completely through the Earth. Within lies the concave lands of hollow Earth.
And what did he expect to find there?
Vast herds of fat buffalo.
His love, knowledge, and respect for our past makes Dave a premier living historian and tonight's honored guest.
The Earth is hollow, gentlemen, and I intend to prove it.
Please welcome Dave Bennett.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As you've probably guessed, I'm not Donna Weaver. She decided she had to go on a journey herself, and she asked me to hold down her chair for her until she returned. But it gives me great pleasure tonight to introduce to you one of my dear friends and a man who has probably forgotten more about the War of 1812 than the British government. His name is Dave Bennett. Welcome, David.
Hey, appreciate it.
Thank you. So we've got a lot to discuss. We've been friends for well over 3 decades, and we're going to go on an amazing journey tonight, not only on the theory of the hollow earth, but also living history in general. So as Mrs. Lapenna said, please go ahead, send in your questions. Dave and I will answer them, or we'll just make up answers. It's not a problem here. So Dave, let's go ahead and start. Let's talk a little bit about how you got started in living history. That's always the way to begin.
Well, I'm an Army brat, and always been interested in military history. 1980, I started getting into Civil War. Actually, 1978, I saw a couple of Civil War reenactments. 1980, got into doing Civil War in the Kansas City area, And by the following year, 6 months later, I was in the cavalry. And then from cavalry, I started doing a mounted officer impression of an infantry battalion. And by 1985, I started dabbling in other time periods, including Mexican War militia out of Missouri, but also at Fort Osage. First time I went to Fort Osage on a Saturday afternoon, the interpreter there drinking his beer can with a handkerchief around it.
Don't we all?
Yeah. I walked up to him and I said, has anybody ever done military impressions here at Fort Osage before? And he basically said, who would be that stupid? So I couldn't wait to start a new impression there of a military interpreter.
Well, I'll tell you, okay, years ago, again, we're dating ourselves here. Today, everything comes through quickly on the internet, but if you wanted to go to an event years ago, literally, guys who would be hosting an event would go around with an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that they had photostated or mimeographed information out about the event. You would pass these out. But also, historic sites used to send their brochures to other historic sites. So I was at New Orleans, and they had a trifold, little flyer there about Fort Osage. And there was this nice line drawing of a 1812 soldier on it. And I look at it and said, that looks so cool. I've got to try doing an event there. And who was it on the cover? But Dave Bennett. And that's, I mean, how we first really got in touch with each other. Dave had been in New Orleans in '90. I've got some great pictures at the 175th. We were all kids back then. But over the years, we've done quite a number of things. When did you film the classic images Shiloh? Was that '87?
Yeah, it would have been '87.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And yeah, that was your first film experience, wasn't it?
Well, actually, no. I did blue and gray.
You did? I didn't know you did. I
Yeah.
thought everybody did blue and gray.
Yeah, I was in blue and gray and sat in the bar with Stacy Keach and watched him do illegal drugs. It was interesting.
Pay no attention to what he just said, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, yeah,
This is a family show.
I'm just making that up.
That's what I figured. But you fell in love with the 1812 time period, all right? What was it, just being inside of Fort Osage? Because once you walk inside that palisade, ladies and gentlemen, Fort Osage is an incredible place, and those fort gates close, and you're there.
I think it has to do with my childhood and growing up as an Army brat. And, you know, I have 90 millimeter tank shells that I pulled out of the junkyard at Fort Knox. I still have them, 50 some odd years ago or more. When I got married in 1996, my best man that I had at the wedding was Greg Higginbotham. And it was Greg in about 1985. He finally looked at me one time and said, you need to go to Fort Osage. And I think it's because of the love I had for forts. And so that's the first time I went out there, and that's what I've already told you, where I asked that fella if anybody did a military impression and found out nobody did. So it became a challenge.
Well, I want to tell you something about this individual. Dave is an amazing leader, and the program that Dave and his wife Sally created at Fort Osage truly is one of the finest living history programs you are ever going to see. And Dave was very instrumental in that. And so what gave you the idea? You created Clemson's company and the Missouri Rangers. Why did you opt for two and not just one?
Well, I think the main reason why was not because any one impression was easier than the other, but actually just to kind of be open to different people coming. And so at that particular time, there was not just a War of 1812 group of people, especially out in the West. So folks were either coming out of Civil War, Mexican War, or even Mountain Man and Rendezvous. And by having both impressions available, and that's the other thing too, the research that I had already done in the West is that you rarely ever saw regulars acting by themselves. There was militia, there was mounted militia, there was mounted rangers, there was rangers on foot, and then there were small detachments of regulars. They were all working together, which must have been interesting because of the different manuals they all had.
Yes. Well, you think about Russell's expedition, all of these things. We have this idea that the American soldier is all regular or whatever. It's completely, the regular force is so minuscule as composed or as compared to the militia factor in the United States.
Well, the more research that I did, reenactorisms were perfect. They were historically correct. Yes, there was men wearing animal skins on their heads. Yes, there was 5 different coats in a formation. It's really amazing. The more you dig in, the more that you find out. For example, Clemson's company actually wore 3 different coats in 1 year.
Right, that's where I wanted to go next, is we get so set in our ways. Okay, the
Yeah.
year is 1813. I must have the 1813 pattern coat or the 1814. And the research that you did, can we go into that?
Sure.
The fact that you took, was it in the space of how many weeks? They got 3 different issues?
Yes, so they were wearing the 1810 uniform in the year 1812, and they received it. Well, they already had the 1810 uniform. The 1812 uniform arrived in the fall of 1812. The following spring, they were now wearing the 1813 uniform. But here's the deal: the way that the supply organization worked at that time, things were being pieced out to arsenals would cut out the patterns, mail it to contractors, who then returned it back. And I found letters where they complained about, we sent you 20 size 3s and 1 size 1, and came back as 8 size 1s, 9 size 2s. And so the supply was completely messed up. And when they did get the 1813 coats, they actually only got enough for 2/3 of the company, because they had a bunch of recruits that were added in the summer. So you literally had, so that we'll take by early 14 in the year, the companies of the 1st U.S. Infantry were still wearing the 1811 cap. Half of them had 1813 coats. The other half had 1812 coats. And instead of sending the coats with a lace on them, they left the lace, so the men never sewed the lace on. It was a hodgepodge of different time periods.
What you see, for example, when I've looked into the 7th Infantry supply records, you look at New Orleans. Now this is 1814, so it's the end of the war. So you think, all right, everything by now is pretty well standardized, but you're looking at the companies on Line Jackson. They don't have enough cap plates, they don't have enough cords, and so what they do is they pool everything together. And they said, okay, this company, we're going to give all the cap plates to this. And they don't have enough bayonet belts, okay? So, and what they're doing, they're trying to create some form of uniformity. But you brought up an interesting term that I want to go into, because you and I spent a lot of years fighting it, was reenactorisms, all right? That people think, well, military should be this way. And you look at the source documents and go, that's not what it's telling me. But we were shaped so much by movies, all right? That's how I got started, with the fact of, Fess Parker and Davy Crockett and Fess Parker.
Everybody.
Those were the things that inspired you. But then you start doing it and you realize that's really not right. So Dave and I also have an affinity for tactics manuals, okay? We love tactics manuals. So let's talk about some of the things that you found out, for example, in those tactics manuals that we had been doing that was not correct, and that we changed. You went into standing orders of the 1st Infantry, which answered so many questions, because your regiment was the 1st American Regiment and then the 1st Regiment, so a lot of American military tradition starts with your regiment.
Well, see, it's also kind of the journey I've taken too, is that starting with Clemson's company, Clemson's going to be promoted to major in 1813. And this fellow called John Cleves Symmes takes over the company. And so because of that connection, it led me toward Symmes and his hollow earth theory and the man that he is. But as far as the manuals go, that journey also led me to what's called the standing orders of the 1st Infantry. This is about the only place where it talks about the correct hand salute, which is basically making a square with your elbow and your fingertips coming to the top of your ear. It wasn't up here
No.
like the British Army or
No.
anything like that. Nobody knew what it was, but it's in the standing orders. And the standing orders was actually written by the colonel. And that fills in a lot of gaps that people don't have. Another item is forage caps, or the police caps, or the barracks caps. And the standing orders, they talk about they'll be worn if you're cutting firewood or anything like that. Now they also, at that time, they were wearing the old round hats. And if round hats were worn out and not being used anymore, they could wear those for fatigues too. But you know, the fatigue cap is actually designed to fit on top of a guard's cartridge box.
Correct.
Go pull out your fatigue cap and see if it fits your cartridge box. If it does, it was made correctly.
And one of the reasons, of course, they're doing that because the '08 box does not have ears on it,
That's
which is
correct.
not issued until 1828. I'm sorry, we're all a geek about this stuff, so my apologies, ladies and gentlemen. But that's right. So you're keeping your cartridges dry.
Right.
So those original orders that you found and transcribed were so informative in the fact that they led us down some very great paths. You found the thing where it talks about the towels on the backs of the doors.
Right.
There's all these things that we take for granted today. They had to enumerate for these companies. And here in the order book says, you will do this. Your fatigue clothing will be washed at such and such a time, you know, etc. All of this stuff was spelled out. Today we look at the American military and we just see this incredible organized fighting force, etc., etc.
Well, they were too.
Yeah, you have to look at it from the beginning
Right.
and how it began.
Well, there's a perception too by historians when we were younger, back in the 70s and 80s, that the U.S. Army during this time period were nothing but
Scumbags.
and that kind of stuff. So the standing orders talks about combing your hair, washing your hand, cleaning your bedding. It also talks about military decorum. It talks about when you eat your meals, and at least when the standing orders came out, they were eating their dinners at 1 o'clock. By the 1820s, it's going to be pushed back to 2, 3 o'clock. But dinner was the main meal.
Main meal.
They really got 2 meals a day, and dinner was the main meal where they got really all the meat. So you're getting you're getting 3/4 a pound of pork, or you're getting 1 1/4 of beef. And a lot of people never understood the reason why. Why do you get so much less pork? Well, I'll tell you why. Because it's salted, and the beef is fresh. And the only time they would issue out salt to a man is when you got beef issued. You don't need salt when you're eating
Oh,
pork,
no.
salt pork.
Oh, no.
So there's a lot of things like that in the standing orders that people were lost. And there's a lot of things over the years that we brought out, and 1812 reenactors today are doing them and may not have any idea why they're doing them, such as priority of enlistment numbers.
Yes, let's talk about that, because I don't think the audience probably is familiar with that.
Well, the priority enlistment number was a number that every soldier, when you enlisted, was assigned to you. In theory, it was never supposed to go to anybody else. I have seen, though, that a few times they might have changed that number on you and giving it to somebody else. So a soldier transferred from one company to another, he would be assigned a company number in that company. Now, what do you do with that number? Well, there's, did they call rolls? They could have. We know they marked equipment. Now, when I say equipment, that doesn't mean clothing. There are things that you see in the descriptive books, and a descriptive book is almost like an account book, where it's going to have DR for debit receipt. And clothing is part of your pay. But a canteen is not. A musket's not. That belonged to the company. And those are the things that were marked numerically with your soldier number. Sometimes not, and just with the name of the company. Because technically it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the company.
It belongs to the company.
Now your clothing would, and what I've seen in accounts is most of the time they mark clothing with their name. Like trousers, they would mark it in the waistband. Shirts up on the collar. And now I do know there's a account of a canteen of the 4th U.S. Infantry that was found during the Battle of Brownstown that the Indians had captured when they had killed a soldier. And that particular canteen, the soldier had inscribed his name, the company, and the regiment on the canteen. But that's kind of rare. I haven't seen too many of those in other original canteens.
It's interesting. Don't forget, folks, if you have questions for Dave, because we haven't even started, and we definitely haven't gone into the hollow earth yet, that is going to be an experience worth waiting for. So, yes, Lori?
We have lots of comments.
Oh, good. I can start with my drink here and let you talk.
All right. Well, we're going to digress just a minute because I did tell him I would mention these things when I got a word in edgewise. So Chris Kimball commented on the New Orleans was the ultimate event.
Oh, appreciate that.
And Chris also said that he worked at a state park in Southwest Florida, and it's the former Corshawn Unity Settlement. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, they're hollow earthers.
Yeah, one of their main beliefs were that they lived on the inside of the earth in an inverted globe. So Tim Cohen also commented. We have lots of listeners tonight. James Lundgren, Tim Cohen. I've heard these names before.
I wonder why.
But it was neat last week at Fort Jackson, he said, in Alabama. Al Philo, whom we all know and love, he had all the uniforms displayed. He said it was pretty cool. And James said Dave needs to show his Grail diary.
No.
So, is that an inside joke?
Well, over the years, I have a leather-bound book that I have, when I've found information, entered into it. So, I mean, it's 30 years of researching and finding little tidbits. Things such as when an officer walks into a room, what does the men do?
Stand.
What do they say? How long do they have to be standing if they're standing? This fellow we're going to talk about, John Cleves Symmes, he actually wrote poetry and stuff like that in some of his journals and everything. So it's the Grail diary. Thanks, James. Is basically 35 years of researching and finding information that I can tell you that when we used to go to Mississinawa and Sergeant Major David Lanham would be there, he'd spend 2 hours reading my book.
Yeah,
So
that's David.
Wow.
So there is information in there that people would probably like to know.
Well, what you find out, I think, once you start going into source documents, is you begin to realize these are just normal people.
They are.
And you have an idea of them sometimes as Superman. I can remember, watching old movies. You had Raymond Massey playing Abraham Lincoln, or Royal Dano playing Abraham Lincoln in these basso profundo voices. And then you read the account of Lincoln's voice as nasally, Midwest whiny. But because he is this idol, he has to have this deep voice. But I think that's one of the greatest things your research has proved is just, these people are us. They're just in different clothing. And I've always said the value of history, you can't know who you are if you don't know where you've been. And that's it. And I think one of the greatest faults we have right now is we keep judging our past by our current values.
It's called presentism.
Yeah.
And people have to stop looking at the past through the prism of today.
That is correct.
It's presentism, presentism. If you apply today's values on last year, you will not get the right answer. You cannot do it.
And also, I've always said, don't do it, because posterity is going to do the same thing to you.
I've heard of this before.
Yeah, I've heard it. Sounds like a line in a tavern series.
It does.
Who knows? Yes, Lori.
And just one more thing, I want to get this in there. James Lundgren said, Virginia ham. And another response was from Chris Kimball, can I blame my high blood pressure on the seventh
Yes,
rations?
on the pork products, yes, that
Right.
Cinda would serve at events. We did a campaign event one time, baggage wagons, we were down on the Kiamichi River in Oklahoma, and all we had was salt ham for 3 days. And after 3 days of nothing but boiled salt ham, you never wanted to see a salted meat product again. Now, hold on. I got to tell a story about this guy. All right, we're talking about salted meat. Oh my gosh, I don't know if you remember, Dave. It was a long time ago, and I was still living in Texas at the time, and I used to drive up 750 miles one way to go to Fort Osage for Dave's events. And it was Sunday, and we were going to go out along the Missouri River. All right, and we had the Fort Snelling guys. They were supposed to go hide, and we were going to find them. So what does Dave issue out to everybody? This greasy green salt pork.
It was the best salt pork known to mankind.
With the fat sloughing off it and green coffee beans. And we went out because we're going to roast our coffee beans. And we go out along the river. And nobody had a coffee grinder. So I turned to Eric Hansen. He goes, "What are we going to do, Captain?" I said, "Just use your musket butt." So he's sitting there with that musket butt on a stump on a tin plate. Green coffee, folks. If you've never drank green coffee and eaten green pork, you've missed something. I didn't miss a lot of rest areas between Fort Osage and Fort Worth, Texas.
Well, how's that sensitive Texas deposition?
No, but you begin to understand how these men would get sick and why the Army was so adamant about the way they would prepare their food. And yes, Chris, you can blame your high blood pressure. You tell Cinda that, because I'm not.
No,
Yes.
another item that came out of some of the records that I was looking at, something that we implemented years ago, which was the whiskey ration. And nobody was doing the whiskey ration before. But research never stops. So what is it, just in the last 4 or 5 years, I realized, what are we doing? Issuing bourbon.
Yeah.
Because they weren't aging.
They weren't
their
aging.
whiskey
It was
yet.
clear.
And why the last, several 5, 6 years, we've only done clear whiskey, because that's what it would have been. Now, recently, or about maybe a couple of years ago, we did as close as we could to try to do a period issuing of rations at Fort Osage, the 35th, the last one we did there. So one of the things that I started doing when I started really looking at rations is the Jill Cup that we've been issuing for years and filling up the Jill Cup to the line. Well, guess what? That's not 4 ounces.
It's 2.
That's 3.
Oh, it's only 3?
It's 3.
Oh, we're supposed to get 4.
Yeah, but here's the other thing too. We say 4 ounces a day. So are the 4 ounces that we say is 4 ounces a day, is that what they called 4 ounces back in 1812? And come to find out, no. It should be about 4.5 modern ounces. So we have
I'm
been
enlisting
shorting
now.
everybody. Yes.
Yeah.
So, the research continues, and you can keep on finding information. Now, I will say, after all these years, you can find some really good information, but to get everybody on board and do it, it is hurting cats.
It is hurting cats. Once you get set in your ways
Yes.
and you get some new information, you're always loath to change what you're doing. But then if you're a good living historian, and Dave is one of the best, you just look at it and say, it's not right, we need to change it. And we do, and it may be slow going, but I want to think of when you and I first started and look at the change that has been made over all the years. And I think that now, as you and I have both retired from command and everything, that we can step back and look at those to whom we gave this and smile with pride, because they're leading the way now.
Yes.
And I think that's a fine testament.
Right.
Now, yes, we have a question. Yes, this is amazing. Because why? Because the audience is going, would you bring Mrs. Weaver back? She doesn't talk as much as this guy. All right.
Well, listen to this. We're going to play a little game. You like that?
Depends.
It's guess the subscriber, and I'll make the quote.
Guess the subscriber?
Yes, I'll do the quote as best I can. Sounds rarefied to me.
Oh, I guess Mr. Rails is in the audience.
He is. And Tim Cohen says, I'll pass on the green ham. And
Green
Jim-
eggs in hand.
Well, Tim doesn't know what he's missing.
Yeah. He's from Mississippi.
Oh,
Give him a
it's
break.
his fault. Yeah.
And James Lundgren said, I'm not sure what this is pertaining to, maybe the alcohol, aged 27 minutes.
What do you mean? 2 minutes.
Okay.
2 minutes. We got to serve those men.
And so Tim Cohen said, so our drinks will be stronger now on the set. And Chris said, I suspect that whiskey was watered down.
Oh.
Tim Cohen said, hey,
Oh, I beg to differ, boys and
It
girls,
was not
moms and
watered
dads.
down.
Between
It was not
this
watered
man,
down.
myself, and James Lundgren, ain't nobody drinking watered down booze in our formations.
Now, they might be drinking some,
We don't need to say what they're
Okay,
drinking,
we
but
don't.
it's not water. It's not watered down.
it's not watered down.
All right, now we've
It's also
been,
free of cost to the ones complaining.
how many E's in that whiskey? 2. F-R-E-E. All right, thereby hangs a tail. Anyway, a lot of folks don't realize Dave is one of the finest first-person living historians that you're going to meet. And for years, we would be at events and you would get into first person. And of course, you go to a place like Fort Osage or Mississinawa, which is what I always loved because when the public left, then it was dark and it was easier to imagine as opposed to being up at Fort Erie when you look across and there's the Buffalo skyline or Fort Niagara and you could see all that other things. And so you really would get into things. Well, Dave had done some incredible amount of research and about an amazing man that we're going to discuss in detail tonight. Captain John Cleves Symmes of the 1st U.S. Infantry. He's originally from New Jersey. Don't hold that against him. All right. So, Dave, I want you to tell us a little bit how you got interested in Mr. Symmes and why he is so worth noting, his bravery in battle and his amazing theory.
Well, I guess the first venture into Captain Symmes is when I'm researching Captain Clemson's company. And when Clemson is promoted in January of 13, the company is still at Fort Osage. When they evacuate the end of May, 1st of June, Major Clemson goes back to Fort Osage, evacuates the post, and comes back. Once the company comes back, they're assigned a new captain, and that's John Cleves Symmes. So this man is completely new to the company that he's commanding. Now, I would say that that company from that year, 1813 to 1814, is going to change. They're going to have another 30, 40 men come into the company and probably lose about 10. But there are about 45 or so men that's going to be his company that actually has served at Fort Osage for several years and had re-enlisted not once, not twice, sometimes even 3 times. And the average age of the men in that company was actually 32 years old in 1814. The average height is 5'9". So this is a older company in the 1st Infantry. Now Captain Symmes is commanding. Symmes is a very unique and interesting man. The word relentless applies to him and everything that he did, and not just on his theory, but his whole entire life. So he joined the Army in 1802 at the age of 22. His father was Timothy Symmes Jr. His mother was Anna Mercy. Born in 1780, 22 years old, he joins the Army. But he is named after his uncle. His uncle is Judge John Cleves Symmes of the Ohio Territory, known as the first man to own land or the patent in Ohio. And his father is going to die in 1797. So his father dies young. So John Cleves Symmes, the judge, becomes almost a father figure to John Cleves Symmes, Captain John Cleves Symmes. Now, sometimes he's known as Junior, but he was never a junior. So he always went by Captain to differentiate himself from his famous uncle. And his uncle was famous, absolutely. His uncle also gave him a farm in Hamilton, Ohio. And going to be Captain John Cleves Symmes, when he joined the Army, he said he wanted to join to be able to make something in life for himself. Now, this is a man who borrowed books, read his father's books. His father one time chastised him not doing his chores when he was 11 years old because he read the entire 2-volume set of Captain Cook's Voyages. 11 years old. And his father called him a bookworm, and he never forgot it. One time Symmes said that maybe, perhaps, he's a better thinker than he is a writer. He taught himself how to speak French and how to write French. when he was, now he's going to join the Army in 1802. He's going to serve at Fort Massac, Illinois, but eventually on Army posts down on the Mississippi, like Columbian Springs, Fort Coupe, and also at New Orleans.
Does he ever go to Fort Adams?
Also Fort Adams as well. Good point. And he hired a young Spanish boy one time to teach him how to speak Spanish. He thirsted for knowledge and reading books. He never stopped, but he was a super sensitive guy. First off, he's middle stature, blue eyes. He was described as a nasally voice, and one fellow officer said he spoke slow like Moses. Wasn't necessarily a good speaker, yet later he's going to go around the country and the world to talk about his theory. So the first time that I found that his theory was coming out anywhere in written words is in the year 1814. He's actually near Fort Erie, and just quickly, he had already been in the battles of Lundy's Lane and the sortie of Fort Erie. So this is after that. They're on guard duty, picket duty, his company. And him and an officer, Lawrence Tolliver, is sitting with their backs in the lock of a Virginia snake fence in the tall grass. And he starts telling his lieutenant about his theory of 5 concentric spears, and going through the polar caps you can sail and journey into the center of the earth where there was lush vegetation and fat buffaloes.
All right, well, let's talk about...
That's 1814.
That's right. So let's talk about that theory, all right? Because I also want to talk about his Army service and his honor.
Yes.
Because that is so important.
Yes, it is.
For many of you in the audience. Honor among military men, even today, is a very precious commodity. As a man, you only have 2 things. One is your word and your work, and you lose your word, all right, nobody holds you in esteem. So in a military post, honor was above all.
Right.
So we're going to talk about military honor in a minute. But he comes up with this theory. Do you know when? So he tells Tolliver, you say in
1814.
Okay.
So obviously it wasn't new even then. Mm-hmm. So most historians and online sources will say he came up with it in 1818. When he was touring the country talking about his theory in the 20s, he always went with his stepson, Anthony. And this is really interesting about him as well, is that his company commander in 1806 and 07 was Benjamin Lockwood. Lockwood would die in 1807, leaving a widow with 5 children, 4 girls and 1 boy. Actually, 5 girls and 1 boy, 6 children. And about a year later, he married her. And he treated her children just like they were his own. In fact, to his own detriment. Now, I'm getting off a little bit on a tangent, but you have to see this man was relentless about anything and everything he did. Benjamin Lockwood had some land in Ohio that he wanted for his children. Even at the detriment of his own land, John Cleves Symmes would pay taxes on the land in Ohio before he ever paid on his own land, because he wanted to make sure the children got that.
That's called honor.
It's called honor.
It's called honor.
And Anthony was the oldest son of his wife's earlier marriage, and he always went with John Cleves Symmes on these trips. Never left him alone. So where we at?
I don't know. Like I said, we're going to go down so many rabbit holes. We're going to be in the center of the hollow earth before long.
Yes. Well, let's go back to honor.
All right.
Let's
Let's talk about here's to a bloody war or a plague and a fast promotion. Let's talk about some of the affairs of honor and why perhaps they might have been fought. So let's talk down there in the Mississippi Territory, where Symmes is going to get his Irish up, as we would say, even though he's not Irish. But he's going to get his Irish up because of something that is done to him.
Yes. So here's the deal with Symmes, is that he's a young man. He's a 2nd lieutenant. And all of his journals and letters tells us, when you're reading it, not just about him, but the entire Army And what happens to him, you can apply to what's going on in the Army. So he's being transferred around from Point Coupé to New Orleans and all these other posts. They 6 months here, 6 months there. So what happens is he's at Point Coupé, and the surgeon mate, Fowler, comes back from furlough and starts spreading rumors that Lieutenant Symmes had allowed him to go on furlough, but while the doctor was away, Symmes treated some of the soldiers for sickness and was going to charge the surgeon mate. He also spread around that he told the surgeon mate that he'd be paid for this furlough. When he got back, he wasn't. Now, none of that was true, but all these rumors started being spread was after Symmes had been transferred to New Orleans. So he made up a lie that he had to go back to Point Coupé, that post, for business, for record taking or something. And what he really wanted to do was demand a certificate from the surgeon mate that the surgeon mate was lying about these things.
Correct, because what is so important to a gentleman is his honor.
That's correct.
And today I think we have scrapped that idea that your word has no meaning. You go on Facebook and people, I'm not on Facebook, but you go on Facebook and people just, the stuff that they will post and stuff, because you don't have any, you're a cyber ranger or whatever.
They don't have honor.
Yeah, and they could just say this because they know
Right.
nothing is going to happen. So this guy comes back, Symmes comes back,
Yeah.
and he's all the way in New Orleans. This guy's talking smack about me.
Right.
All
And
right.
he goes all the
And he
way
goes
back
all
up the
the way
river.
back up, because your honor is everything.
And you know what Surgeon Mate Fowler does? He writes out a certificate.
That's right.
Really
Yeah,
quick,
right.
because it was all bull crap.
Yeah. So that's Missouri. Okay, folks, that's Missouri.
That's Missouri time.
Yeah. So let's talk about, all right, with the adjutant. That's the
Right,
one I want
so
to talk about.
he returns back to his post because he had been transferred to New Orleans. He gets back there and he's walking pretty good, man. I showed that surgeon mate. But all the other young lieutenants are saying, nah, do you know that so-and-so doesn't think you're a gentleman? And this lieutenant says, that lieutenant says you're not a gentleman. They're all pointing fingers and all this kind of stuff. And about the same time, he goes into the adjutant's office. Now, he'd been away for 2 weeks. So this tells you about the Army. He went into the adjutant's office to look at the adjutant's book on what new orders have come down. Now, in reality, when new orders came down and the adjutant wrote it in there, well, now each company was supposed to enter it in. So he told the adjutant, his name was Clymer, if I recall, and the adjutant said, you're supposed to read your own company book. And Symmes says, well, let me remind you, Lieutenant, you told me previously that if the sergeant failed to write it into the company book, that it would be all right for me to come and read it here, unless your word wasn't honorable. Well, now the adjutant...
That's it, right there.
Right.
That's
So
it.
now the adjutant, but what did that just tell us? Who's actually filling out these books? You think the officers are sitting down and writing out the book? No, the sergeants are.
That's correct.
They're doing it all, not the officers. And that also shows you, too, that officers, it was very keen for them to find out if any new orders had come down. That was not something they would neglect. So now the adjutant's mad at him, and the adjutant says, nobody thinks you're a gentleman anyway. Ooh. Now, later, I find out in another journal of Symmes that not only did he say that, but he also called Lieutenant Symmes something else. Are you ready? This is very a greenhorn. Oh, is that
YouTube's going to
insulting?
cancel us.
That is insulting. And of course, at that point, Symmes wasn't going to take that either. So he had determined,
See, this is why we drink on set. Dave.
I can understand that.
Okay, refreshment break.
Oh,
I
we have some questions?
I have some comments. I
Comments.
just want to say hi to Davis Longsworth, who joined us, Brian Powell and his wife.
Oh, Brian and Kelly?
And we send our best regards to his wife, who is recovering.
Yes.
And Chris Miller, she's joined us, along with all of our other earlier mentioned gentlemen.
All right, so you said Mr. Longsworth is in the audience.
Yes, he is.
Yes. Well,
Davis.
Mrs. Weaver will be back. Who knows where she's gone? She was talking about something of 100 brave companions, and I just happened to be wandering by, and she'll be back, we hope. So let's go back to, let's talk about those affairs of honor. So now, it's getting rather heated, and I think what we should make clear to our audience is on these isolated military posts, your social circle was
Small.
extremely small. And there is a vast gulf between officer and enlisted men. The two don't mix. And the reason for that is if as an officer, you're going to ask someone to go in a situation where they could possibly lose their life, they can't question you. So they have to look at you in a certain way. And you spread around that, hey, your company commander is not a gentleman. He's this. The enlisted man begins looking up, which creates discord in the company. Discipline breaks down. So for
And
Symmes
there's
to be
one other
accused of
reason as well, which you're gonna hear in a second, is that it takes a long time to get a promotion in the Army. Do you think lieutenants were kind of eager when another lieutenant would get cashiered or leave the Army or whatever, or be killed in a duel? Absolutely. That just means a promotion for yourself.
That's correct.
Were they cutthroat? Absolutely they were. So at this point in time, Symmes has now been offended by the adjutant. He wants to challenge him to a duel. Now there's a point where he starts to walk up to him, but he's not wearing his sword. And if you're not wearing your sword, you're not on duty. And he would not challenge him to a duel at that particular time. So he waited until after a parade was done. And before the lieutenant had completely left the parade, Symmes approached him and more or less challenged him to a duel. And how he did that was he pulled his sword out of the sheath. Okay, that really incensed the adjutant. And the adjutant started to charge him. Symmes brings the sword up in front of his face. So the adjutant stops. And he finally says, "Follow me." And so the adjutant goes to his quarters. Symmes follows him. And when they get to the quarters, the climber goes inside and Symmes paces outside in front of the door. And eventually that lieutenant, the adjutant, calls him inside and he goes inside. Meanwhile, there's about 5 or 6 officers outside. Got their ears to the door. They're looking in the windowsill. They're all trying to find out what's going on. What's going on? Who's going to get killed? Whose job am I going to get? And so they agreed to seconds. When Symmes left that quarters, he writes that he glided back to his quarters like an intoxicated man with pleasurable sensations. I mean, wow. So they have the duel. The doctors are there. Where it is exactly, I'm not sure. But this is when they're down in New Orleans, and there was islands they could go to and so forth. They had doctors there. 10 paces. That's all they're far away. 10 paces between 2 men with pistols. Comes to find out the adjutant was aiming for Symmes' breasts to kill him outright. Symmes had decided, I'm going to shoot his hip instead. Well, by aiming for the hip, he hit the thigh, which means he fired first. So when the adjutant fired, the ball went through Symmes' hanging left wrist because he's firing, he's right-handed, and got him through the wrist. They had to carry off the adjutant from the field. Symmes asked him, "Do you want another shot?" While he's lying there on the ground, he said, "No, I'm good."
Well, doesn't also Symmes never regain the use of that arm?
He never really does. In fact, he just he pulls a handkerchief out of his pocket and wraps it around it, thinking, "I'm good." Well, about 2 days later, he's almost dying of fever and infection and all that kind of stuff. It takes almost 4 weeks before he recovers, and it's not painful. But he's never, ever again able to really rotate his wrist at all. Him and the adjutant, they become best friends after that. And of course, I hadn't mentioned this, but he had also asked the general who happened to be General
Wilkinson.
spy number 13
That's
for the
right.
Spanish government.
Agent number 13.
He asked him for a court of inquiry, and they were going to do it. But after this, he went to his captain, Captain Benjamin Lockwood, was going to be the president of the court. And Lockwood told him, there's no reason for a court of inquiry. Everybody understands, yes, they think you're a gentleman. And then he drops the court of
Correct,
inquiry.
because at that point, your honor has been
Right,
restored.
and at that time, nobody questioned him. But to fight a duel, because you were called a greenhorn, is outstanding.
Well,
Or just crazy.
let's talk about
But honor was everything.
honor was everything. Now let's talk about the 1st Infantry going up to Canada and where Symmes is going to take that bravery. He could stand against a man face to face at 10 paces. All right, what's he going to do
When he's in battle.
when he's in battle?
Yeah, so let's also talk about him. If you looked at him, he looks like the most unlikeliest person to be heroic or brave. He looks like a middle-aged fella. And when he dies in the late 20s, he's going to be about 49. So he's not necessarily old, but he doesn't look like a swashbuckling fella. He just doesn't. But here where you can also already see inklings of what he's going to be. This is before they leave St. Louis. So out of all the captains, he's the one asked to go to the arsenal and pick out the right firearms to issue to the 220 men in 3 companies of the 1st Infantry that is stationed west of the Mississippi. And now these companies used to be the Fort Bellefontaine Garrison Company, the Fort Madison Garrison Company, and the Fort Osage Garrison Company. So these were all companies that for years have been by themselves, and for the first time ever, they're all together. And Symmes goes to the arsenal, he picks out all the weapons, they got new clothing, and by April of 1814, they're now cordelling, rowing, sailing up the Ohio to Pittsburgh. They arrive July 4th. They get these new caps, they're made out of leather. And the front has a shield in front that goes up, and the nickname of these caps are called tombstones. Okay, the plume, the hat plate, and the bands that today we call the cord and tassel, but they called the bands, they weren't issued. It was a tombstone with nothing on it. So they got a cap. They also got companies with 2 different coats they're wearing. They're now on the 3rd manual of the war. Anyway, so at Pittsburgh, they go across land to Fort Erie. They go across land at modern-day Erie, Pennsylvania. They take boats over to Fort Erie. They take a boat over to Buffalo. They march up to Fort Schlosser, which is near the falls. And then on July 25th, the 3-company battalion begins to cross the Niagara River. 2 companies are across. One hasn't got across yet. And they hear distant sounds of a battle. No orders yet. They haven't even, the Lieutenant Colonel Robert Carter Nicholas, who's commanding the 1st at this time, and Symmes is the senior captain of the 3 captains that are there. He hasn't even, reported yet to his new brigade commander, who he's been told in mail that it's going to be General Ripley. But he hasn't even met him yet. He doesn't know where he's at. So they're just at the shore. They hear the firing. Nicholas has the 2 companies drop their knapsacks, and they run to camp, which is about a couple miles. They get to camp, and there's nobody they can really find. The commanding general, General Brown, is not there. Ripley's not there. There's some people on guard duty and stuff like that, but nobody really knows anything. Nobody gives him any orders. So he hears the firing north of the camp. So Nicholas takes those 2 companies, and they move as fast as they can without using the drum. They are going north on the, what I think called the Queens Road, or whatever road that is, that takes you up to the Great Falls. They're on the Canadian side, but the Great Falls of Niagara. And they arrive at about 9:30 at night in the dark. They march through a peach orchard. They go through a wheat field. They just bumbling around. They don't know where anybody is. And they're only about 200 yards or a little bit, maybe a little bit more than that away from the British line. They bump into General Winfield Scott. He has no idea what Ripley's brigade is. He's a lot of help. And then they bump into this engineer officer, McRae. He doesn't know where anybody is. But then finally, General Ripley and General Brown hears that the 1st Infantry is on the field. They really don't know any idea how many men they have. They have 150, 2 companies. The 3rd company is still on the United States soil. So at that point, they get an order through a staff officer from General Brown that they will march straight up this hill toward the enemy line. And at the same time, the other regiments in Ripley's brigade on their right somewhere are going to be marching up too. Nicholas is worried. He can't see anybody. So the moon is out, but they are on the dark side of the hill at Lenny's Lane. So they're in the pitch black. Can't see your hands in front of you until you get to the top of the hill. And so he actually sends his adjutant, John Shaw, off looking for the other regiments before he moves, and he can't find them. So he says, all right. So they start moving up the hill slowly. Well, they're not that far away from the British line. They can hear them giving commands. So who's up there? About seven artillery pieces. There's about 2,000, 3,000 infantry in support of the guns. There's a lot of people up there, 150 men. Now, meanwhile, on the far right flank, the 23rd is making a charge and they get pushed back. Between the 23rd and the 1st is this regiment called the 21st. Colonel Miller's leading them. Okay, so General Brown said, can you take those guns? I'll try, sir. Right. Well, he's going to be able to do it because of the 1st Infantry. Because they're moving up the hill quietly while the 1st Infantry is moving up and everybody on top of the hill is shooting at him. And they start to take casualties. The first man of the 1st Infantry is killed. He got a nickname called Catfish Smith. He's wounded. Well, you don't have to be a brain wizard or an engineer to be able to count how many artillery guns are shooting at you, even though they're high, and how many muskets are shooting at you. And Lieutenant Colonel Nicholas thinks, this is way too hot for my little band. He gives them an order, they turn around calmly, and they march back down the slope of the hill. Meanwhile, because of all that was going on, the 21st has now sat their muskets on a fence rail real close to the British artillery, fire, and kill almost every horse and every man or run them off, and they're on the top of the hill. Without orders, Nicholas gives orders for his men. They go right up the hill, and they fall into the right of Miller's men. But then Ripley shows up and moves them to the left. Now, after the war, or actually after the battle, there's going to be this smart crackerjack staff officer on General Brown's staff who's going to write a report to him and say, the 1st Infantry ran. Yeah, he didn't know anything because it was in the dark. All he saw was they went up and they came down. And in 1816, in a court-martial, Nicholas is going to be charged for that, and the court-martial is going to find and determine that he acted in the correct manner and did the right thing. 150 men against 3,000, it doesn't quite work out right. So the 1st Infantry is now back up on the hill, and by the way, they're in a cemetery on Lundy's Lane near the Niagara Falls. The men of the 1st Infantry are going to fire on average 70 rounds per man. And they're firing buck and ball. After the Battle of Lundy's Lane, the British government actually had a formal complaint to the American government that somebody was firing barbarous rounds at our men. And most likely they were the only ones with buck and ball because that's what they used in the West.
Right, and buck and ball becomes a standard. You see it everywhere. Now, the one thing is the 1st Infantry has an incredible record, which has really been glossed over, and Dave has done an amazing job of bringing it back to life. But in the few minutes that we have left now, my brother, we're going to the hollow earth.
Wow.
So tell us, in your own way, Captain Symmes, why is the earth hollow and how do we get there?
Well, it's very simple. You can find it in nature. The rings of a tree. When you were a child and you threw a rock in a pond, you saw concentric spheres. It's in nature. It's everywhere. But the polar caps are open 4,000 to 6,000 miles, depending on which one you go to. And I intend to go to the polar cap in the north. The way that the Earth is designed and the openings in the poles, you can sail into the opening of the pole without even realizing it. Now, we know it's there. Captains in the north, they report all the time of seeing birds that you only find in warm climates. Lush greenery is found up near the polar caps. Where did it come from? It comes from somewhere. And with the concentric sphere underneath, supported by atmospheric gases and the reflective light coming through both openings, there's light down there, and it creates a very lush environment that supports vegetation and animals.
All right. So you say the opening at the North Pole is what? 4,000?
4,000
And at the
miles.
Southern Pole, it's 6,000.
That's correct.
Wouldn't you just you go to the edge of the hole, and wouldn't you just fall in?
No, if you sail in, you will sail right in. It's such a gradual decline into the center of the earth. It's not like a hole.
All right. Well, let's assume your theory is correct, and we're beginning to sail into the hollow earth. Now, I had read that you believed there were 5 hollow earths or 5 concentric spheres, but you've changed that now to just one?
Well, again, this is a theory, and until I am actually there with the 100 brave companions and our 3 ships that should do the job, then it will no longer be a theory. But as that theory has progressed and more thought has been given to the different gaseous atmospheres that would be there, is that it's more inclined to probably be 1 sphere instead of 5.
Mm-hmm. And did you not try, I'm just being inquisitive, did you not try to get Congress to allocate funding for you, and weren't you turned down?
Well, actually, I didn't try, is that many men can see the wisdom in this expedition. And not just, now, the latest one was a bill put by Colonel Johnson, but actually there was a congressman who had done one as well. And there's another congressman who actually put a bill forth to increase my pension and my pay as a captain based on the theories that I've developed. But Johnson has done this bill. It got tabled, but then it actually got to the Committee of Foreign Affairs, and they didn't vote on it. So right now it's going to be difficult, but the British government, the Russians, even the French are all fitting out expeditions to the polar caps. Do we want to be the last ones there?
I agree, because let's put our flag there and claim that for our own.
Absolutely.
So let's look at those hollow lands, or one hollow land. We'll assume that there's just one there now. What are you going to find? Animals? Are you going to find races of men? What do you see as being the inhabitants of this earth?
Well, based on reports from sea captains who've been up north and seeing animals sometimes in on ice that shouldn't even be there, I think we're going to find animals without a doubt. That kind of vegetation with that kind of environment should support buffalo and probably herds of other animals such as elk and so forth.
What about vegetables?
Well, absolutely. If that kind of atmosphere will support a very thrifty vegetables.
Okay. And so what you're saying is like that window that we see over there. Light coming in through that window gives enough light here to illuminate this room. So the holes at the pole refract the light down into the hollow.
Oh, that's correct. That's
All
correct. We know there's gas in the earth and around the sphere in the hollow earth. We know that there's sometimes fissures in our earth and gas comes out, and that gas supports that. Not only would the gas support a spear or a concave land, but it's also going to help refract the light as well.
Do you believe there are another race of men that live within the earth? Because I've read where, as you said, people go north and they encounter the inhabitants up there and they said, well, where do you come from? They say, up north, but even farther north of us, there are other men who dwell.
Absolutely. There's a tribe of Eskimos that we know up there, and when you talk to them, they always say that their founders of their people came from further north. So further north would have to be in the openings at the poles. There's no other way. Do I know that for a fact? I'll know it when we get there. But what we do know scientifically is that it's an atmosphere to support animals and vegetables.
Well, you've been lecturing around the country and charging 12.5 cents.
50 cents in Philadelphia.
I spent a week there one afternoon. So 50 cents in Philadelphia. Huh?
Yes, sir.
An interesting theory. Are you any closer to having the money to do this expedition?
Not yet, but I'm not going to give up. I don't know if you heard, there's a young man named Reynolds, college educated, completely believes in my theory, and he was going with me on some of my lectures, but kind of gone our own way. He's still lecturing on my theory, and that's fine. The more the merrier. As soon as we can get funds, I have not given up on that, and it will only take about 100 men and 3 ships if we can get the money from the government to do this, because it needs to be a government-sponsored expedition, because we want to plant the flag for our country.
Excellent. Mrs. Lapenna, are there any other questions?
Yes. Looks like Captain Symmes has one brave companion. Let's see who that is. Captain Dufour has stepped
Oh,
up.
Captain Dufour.
He's a brave man.
He is.
He's an honorable man.
99 to go.
And his artillery battery is they have performed so much better than I saw that infantry
you're
company
talking, you're
drilling.
yes.
Yes.
Yeah, Captain Lindley's
Yeah.
infantry company. Yes, I understand that.
He also says the
Cornstalk
Helvetians.
militia.
I apologize. He also said the Helvetians will bring old bets.
They'll bring Old Bet's artillery
Bet's,
along? They're going to
yes.
drag it with them.
Tell the good captain that I am very pleased.
And Captain Beacon has the navigational charts to get there. So there's 2.
There's 2.
Yeah.
We're getting there.
If Beacon has got the navigation charts, brother, I feel sorry for
I'm in
him.
trouble.
And James Lundgren, number 23, still wants to go.
Oh,
There you go. You're getting a crew.
We're getting a crew.
that's amazing. Now, before we leave tonight, need to state, John Cleves Symmes was an honorable man, and he was an amazing man, and he's still with us in the way that he's buried in Hamilton, Ohio. So
Yeah.
let's close out the evening and let's talk about the end of Simms's life. And today, you don't have to go to the Hollow Earth. You can go to his grave in Hamilton, Ohio.
Well, he had a farm that his uncle, Judge John Cleves Symmes, had given him. It was at Hamilton, Ohio. And that's where his family was. So in the last year that he was touring, I believe it was 1829, he had a stepson, Anthony, with him. He had gotten so sick he could not even walk. And his somewhere in February, his stepson got him back home, literally had to put him in a bed and place a bed in a wagon and drive the wagon back to his farm in Hamilton. And for the next 6 months, he suffered and he died in May of 1829, age 49 and a half. Now, he had some amazing sons. One was known as Americus. He had another son who was an ordnance officer. He had a son who was a scientist. Now, Americus, in I think 1874, 76, somewhere in there, would actually build a monument for his father. It includes a granite pillar with a hollow earth on top. Now, city of Hamilton decided they wanted to make a park out of that burying ground. and they moved all of the graves out of there, except for Captain John Cleves Symmes. He's still there, all by his lonesome, under a globe open at the poles.
And you can go there today, and you can still see him. So, anything else, Mrs. Lapenna?
Yes. James Lundgren wants to thank everybody for doing this. He really enjoyed it. And
He's a Lawrence Tolliver man, all right? He's a Lawrence Tolliver man. That's a story unto itself.
Timothy Cohen says, "You're welcome, Captain Symmes." And Captain Marco says, "So the 1959 movie Journey to the Center of the Earth was a true story?"
Well, there's a...
Where have you been tonight, Mark?
So, to kind of explain all that real quickly. All right, so Reynolds, a disciple of Symmes, was actually a friend with
Poe, Edgar Allan Poe.
Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe wrote poetry about the center of the earth. Jules Verne's read Edgar Allan Poe's poetry and wrote Journey to the Center of the Earth. And today we have 345 B and D movies about it.
And I didn't get employment in any of them.
Any of them, not a one.
So, yes.
One more thing.
One more. This is wonderful. Folks, thanks so much for
Yes.
sending in your questions. And all of you have been good pards over all the years and great living historians. Thanks for keeping American history alive and tuning into our channel.
Absolutely.
So, Lori?
Captain Beacon offers this quote.
Oh, no, it's Shakespeare.
To
I can
quote
see
the
it
bard.
Right now.
To quote the bard, "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy."
Philo said that.
Yes,
Hamlet.
Philo.
He's just
Hamlet.
repeating Philo.
Right.
He's not repeating Shakespeare. Philo said that.
So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. I'm sorry Mrs. Weaver didn't make it back. We had hoped that she would, but obviously she's been delayed. So until our next time, excuse me.
Wait, I'm back. And guess what? I saw them. Vast herds of fat buffalo.
Told ya.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Until next time, I need a drink.